Welcome. I'm John McCaa, a journalist, a lover of history, and a proud member of the board of directors of the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. Next Wednesday, November 22nd, marks the 60th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The Sixth Floor Museum plays a vital role in preserving what we believe to be a watershed moment of American history, a generation-defining event that continues to influence our world today. With each passing day, the museum's role becomes more important in helping new generations understand the lasting impact of President Kennedy's life and death on Dallas, on the nation, and the world. So we are honored to welcome Gerald Posner, award-winning author of the seminal book, Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK, in a conversation with former Secret Service agent Clint Hill and his wife, Lisa McCubbin Hill, noted co-authors of 5 Days in November. This remarkable conversation will vividly take you back to November 1963 and the days, the months, and the years following the assassination. It's all related through the personal experiences, the memories of Clint Hill, guided by Gerald Posner's expert knowledge of the assassination history, and of course the ongoing interest and relevancy over these last 60 years to the present day. So, please join me in welcoming Gerald Posner, Lisa McCubbin Hill, and Clint Hill.
Your original book 10 years ago was, I think, a game changer in terms of having a perspective on it. And now I'm knocked out by this afterword that you have put in, because it is not just about the details of what happened that day. Everyone wants to know that, but it's also very much about you. It opens up a door into the personal Clint Hill. You're not just the man in the Superman cloak who has no feelings and is doing what you're supposed to do. And it's a very moving and compelling addition to not just assassination history of the case, but a great read on its own, just for somebody. And I want to start off, if I can, by something you said in this. You said no matter how much training we had a lot of training, you're never prepared for it.
That's true. The things happen so fast, and you must react instantaneously, or else you're not going to make a difference. And the point is, we want to be able to make a difference. We want to be able to protect whoever it might be. And but it just comes out of the clear blue. I've always said you never know what's around that next corner until you get there. And that's the case with an assassination like this. You just have no idea, and then all of a sudden, wham, it happened. And you just have to react, and that's what was my case.
And some of that reaction is instinctive. You don't have the time to think it out.
Oh, no, you don't have time to think about it at all. In this case, I was tipped off to the fact that the president had been hit by his own movement. When he threw his hands up to his throat and started to fall slightly to his left, I knew that he had obviously been shot. And so that's when I made my move. But the other agents didn't have a chance because of the positions they were in, and we were all looking for the source of the noise that we didn't at first realize or know that it was actually a gunshot. And I just happened to be in a position where when I looked for that, I scanned the president's car and I saw him react. The other agents on the other side of the car would have done the same thing if it had gone the other way, but it didn't. And so they were looking away from the president at the time, not realizing he'd been hit.
You also add something that I think a lot of people who have just watched the Zapruder film think about, and they don't have an answer to. They think, wow, Clint Hill is running for the back of the car, for the back of the limo, and he makes it there. What about that Secret Service agent in the front right-hand seat, Roy Kellerman? head of the unit, why didn't he just pop over the back seat? You have a very good answer about that I'd never known until I saw it. Tell us why Kellerman didn't just jump over the front seat and try to protect the president.
The way that car is configured, it's a bubble top that take the top off when in situations like we were in. President demands that he not be covered up and he wants people to see him. There's a forward attachment just above the front seat. It's maybe 18 inches higher than the top of the seat. It's made out of aluminum. It's the forward attachment for the bubble top. There is no way for any human being to get between the seat that they're sitting on into the back of the car where the president is seated, because that gets in the way. You have to stop the car and get out and come in either over the top of the door or through the doorway, but you can't get there from that right front seat. It with inside, trying to come around through that area directly into the presidential seating area. It's impossible. And besides that, there was another gentleman in the way. That was the governor. He was between the person in the right front seat and the president.
And before I get back to those incredible moments when you are actually getting to the limousine and getting on the back of the car, you also mentioned that in the rear of the follow-up car that you had been on, another Secret Service agent, George Hickey, and he's photographed, stands up, and he has a AR-15 at one point in his hands. Somebody wrote an entire book at one point called Mortal Error about the fact that he fired a shot by mistake that killed the president. I thought I'd let you address that very easily, and you do in your book.
Well, that is so ridiculous. There were two other gentlemen in the car seated next to Hickey. Ken O'Donnell, the president's chief of staff, and Dave Powers, the president's assistant, who was as close to Kennedy as anybody. If anybody, any agent, would have attempted to fire or did fire, they would have killed him sitting right there. I mean, there is no way. And the photographs show that that gun was never pointed at the president. It was when he had the gun, the muzzle was always up. And he was looking for the source of the sound as well as the other agents. So there's no way that they can make a case for that. And they've tried. It's been in court. And unfortunately, Mr. Hickey is no longer with us. He's died, but I think before he died, it was pretty much that was not true.
Yeah, I thought it was one of the most outrageous and ludicrous of all the theories, and I couldn't believe that a publisher put a book out on it. You mentioned, again, one other thing just before getting to you on that car. You mentioned the bubble top a few times when you were just speaking before. Tell a lot of lay people to the assassination, new people, young, who weren't alive at the time, haven't studied the case. They hear a bubble top and they think, oh, wow, if there had been a bubble top on the car, maybe that would have prevented the assassin from killing the president. You are, on the security detail, that. Tell us about that top.
It's made out of just plain old plastic. There's no bullet resistance to it at all. It comes in. It's kind of a chore. It's kept in the trunk when not in use, and it's very rarely in use, except when we're transporting the car from point A to point B. It's usually on an airplane. Nobody's in it, and the president does not want to use the bubble top when he's in a parade situation, because he does not want the people to have the feeling that there's anything between him and them. And he thinks that would give that kind of a feeling. And so he's very insistent. No bubble top. The only time he ever agrees to have the bubble top, if the weather is such that you just have to, or if it's windy and Mrs. Kennedy is long and it's going to mess up her hair, he will give up to that.
You're right. As a matter of fact, I've seen, many other instances in which in Chicago, Miami, and others, the president did not have a bubble top. He often had the top off. That was his way of reaching people.
Yeah.
When you ran, you were one of the tallest. You appears by pictures, when I look at it, that you were one of the tallest of the Secret Service agents. True? Or did you just look tall in
Well,
pictures?
I wasn't that tall. I was barely just under 5'11", so I
Wow.
wasn't that tall.
When you made it to the car and you get to go on, you're thinking first about the president, but you're assigned to the protection detail for Mrs. Kennedy, to the First Lady.
Yes.
At what point do you see that she's starting, it looks like, to almost come, reaching back and coming out of the back seat? Is it as you get to the car?
Yes, just as I got there. I got there, I put 1 foot on the rear bumper. There was a place there as well, 1 foot square for agents to put their feet, and they could stand there if need be during a motorcade. As I got my 1 foot on there, she started to come up. I slipped. My foot came off. I had to take a couple more steps in order to get up there. Luckily, I had that handhold in my grasp, so I was able to pull myself. Because if I hadn't gotten up there, you and I wouldn't be talking today. And she probably wouldn't have lived either, because she'd have come right off the back of the car.
Yeah, it appears in the Zapruder film as it's slowed up. It's not that you don't push her back in, but your arrival at the back, you coming in, sort of snaps her out of this moment of, and she realizes and goes back into the car.
I touched her, but I didn't push her. I did, and so I helped her get back into her seat. And she did get a hold of some of the material from the truck. Some of the stuff that came off out of the president's head wound. But when I got her into the seat where was in the left rear seat of the car, then the president fell farther to his left from where he had been. After the first shot, and he started to fall to his left, he continued to fall until their heads were almost touching, her right cheek and his left cheek. And his head was down, tilted down. And so when that headshot hit, it's a miracle it didn't kill her as well. And it entered in such a way in the back of the head, somewhere getting back in here, and then blew out this top portion of the head. Just blew it up. A portion of the skull was still attached to the hair and the skin. It just flapped forward. But there was so much material that came out of that wound, there was no possibility that it was survivable.
Do you remember when of course, when you reach the back, you have to take that extra step. You're holding on. You get back up and that's the moment at which William Greer, the driver of the car, starts to hit the gas and accelerate out. And you're hanging on for dear life in some ways from that moment until you get to Parkland Hospital. High speeds on Stemmons Freeway. Tell me, to the extent that you remember, what that was like. We go often from Dealey Plaza to the president being wheeled into the trauma room when we forget that in between there are two things I'd like you to talk about. One is that hanging on for dear life ride to Stemmons. The other is we forget the personal. You don't, because she was your assignment, the First Lady. But the American people forget what it must have been like, the horror of being the First Lady, cradling your husband, whose head has been blown out in your lap on this ride. It had to be just a time of horror. Please tell us what it was like.
Yeah, I got there, and amazingly, I got there at all. And when I got up on top, and Mrs. Kennedy was now situated in the left rear, one of the corner of the seat, and the president his head was on our lap. I had a hold of the left side of the car with my hand, and I had managed to wedge my foot in to the right side. So I was kind of wedged in there, lying right on top of where the trunk and the back seat met. And but I'm just surprised that she was managed as well as she did because of what happened right there. I mean, not foot, we're talking about inches. And she was right there, and it just was amazing that she didn't get hit herself, because that came so close. It was I would guess, 6, maybe 7 inches from her face is where that bullet entered the president's skull.
And, Gerald, I wanted to add something that people may not also think about. The reason that, Clint is getting up there to shield the occupants of the car and has his body like he does as, they're racing away. He didn't know that there were going to be no more shots.
Right.
He was expecting more shots would be coming, and thank God there weren't. But that's why he was in that position, and there could have been more shots. So it just, I don't know. I just always like to point that out.
That's a great point, Lisa. You're absolutely right. We know what we know, and we look back the lens and we think, well, you view everything that way. But at the moment it's playing out, you have no idea if there's another shooter somewhere, if there will be additional shots, if it's a plot involving other people. So he's clearly reacting to protect.
My ride from Dealey Plaza to Parkland was scary, to say the least, because of my lying up on the top of that car. I was wearing sunglasses to begin the trip. Halfway to Parkland, I turned my head somehow, and woof, the glasses went flying. So if anybody in Dallas has found a pair of sunglasses, they might be mine. It was just, and I was lucky I didn't fall off, didn't slide off, even when we turned into Parkland Hospital. And because we were going relatively fast, right behind the chief of police car.
Like 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did not slow the car up because you were on the back.
No.
No.
No. I was not in their thought line whatsoever.
Clint, at what moment when you get there, you pull yourself up and the car is speeding out of Dealey Plaza, do you get a chance for the first time to see the president's condition? And what does that tell you?
As soon as I got up on top and got situated and looked down, his head was in her lap. The left side of his head was against her lap. The right side was up. I could see his eyes were fixed. The entrance into the skull from the top, there was a hole. No brain matter. You couldn't see anything in there except blood. There were bone fragments and brain matter and blood all over the car, all over me, all over Mrs. Kennedy. It appeared to me immediately that this was not survivable. In fact, I turned and I gave a thumbs down to the car behind me, the follow-up car, and just shook my head, no. And then I turned and I yelled at the driver, get us to a hospital. Well, they were already in the process of doing that.
And you could tell that, I say this as a statement, but I mean it as a question, that the governor had been hit and Nellie Connolly had not?
I could tell that at one point that he had hit. I didn't realize it at first. And then he moved slightly and I could see the blood all over his shirt. And so I knew that he had been hit. She was not in that pathway, so I didn't think that she had been hit, and she wasn't.
When you talk about, and Mrs. Kennedy, I say this without meaning it as a medical diagnosis, but she must have been in shock.
No question, she was, yes.
Right. But the rest of that day,
she doesn't. When she testified to the Warren Commission, they asked her the question about my being up on the back of the car. She doesn't even remember that.
Yeah, remarkable. you think that when there was a moment, as a matter of fact, there's a picture of you, there's a point at which the car earlier in the motorcade before it was up there, there's a point at which sometimes you could go to the rear of the car and you literally could be on the sort of what I call the rear of the limousine in a crouched position, and then you jump off of that and go back to your position standing on the rear car. There's no control over when the assassin is going to fire the shots. If the shots had been fired during a time when you were crouched in that rear position on the car, you would have been in a position to get in there faster and possibly disrupt it.
Oh, yes, true, but very true. If I'd have been up there at the time that the shots were fired, I could have instantaneously covered the president. And that's what the Secret Service training is all about. Cover and evacuate. Cover and give the driver an opportunity to get you out of that situation. And I would have been able to do that had I been up there at that time. The reason I wasn't up there for the full motorcade was because of something that happened the weekend before in Tampa, Florida. The president had a long motorcade, about 26 miles. It was hot, it was humid. The advance agent instructed the agents that because of the temperatures and humidity, he didn't think they'd last running on the street. So he told them to go ahead and stand on those two slots in the rear bumper, one on each side. And then when you get to the end of the motorcade, you get off and go through the regular process. But about halfway through, President Kennedy happened to turn and he saw them standing there. And he turned around and he tapped the supervisor agent on the shoulder and said, Floyd Boring was the agent, said, Floyd, get those Ivy League charlatans off my car. And Boring said, yes, sir. And he waved them off. And the word went out, he did not want anybody on the back of that car. He was out campaigning. He was trying to gain votes from the people, wanted them to know that he was their friend. And he thought that our being there was something that just stayed in the way between he and those people.
And if you see pictures from that motorcade and the two Secret Service agents standing up there on the back of the car, it really is imposing.
It is.
And it looks like they're hovering over him. And so you can understand why he wouldn't want that. And, Gerald, this was a different time too. President Eisenhower had gone around the world in open top cars with hundreds of thousands of people. This is just what presidents did in those days. It was very, very common. And President Kennedy had been around the world in open top cars. It wasn't like Dallas was the first time this had happened.
No, it's a good point, Lisa. And Lisa and Clint, one of the best examples to show what a different and more innocent era it was that when the motorcade route was published in the two Dallas morning newspapers on the 19th and 20th, as it was published in other cities when the president was there, you didn't say, Clint, for instance, oh my God, why are they printing the motorcade route? Because it was considered that's the way people would come out to see the president. It wasn't a security issue.
It was what the politicians wanted. They wanted to build a crowd, and the only way to build a crowd was to tell the people where he was going to be. So you just had to accept that.
Tell me, if you can, in a description, the pandemonium and at the hospital. I mean, Mrs. Kennedy goes into the room the trauma room where they're trying to treat her husband. Tell us what you were doing there in Parkland when that was going on before they officially announced the president's death.
Well, first we had to get the governor out of the car because the way the car was configured, he was seated immediately in front of the president in what we called a jump seat. The back of that jump seat was right up against President Kennedy's knees. So before you could do anything to help the president, you had to get the person, whoever was in that seat, out of the car. And it just happened to be Governor Conley. So they got him up, they got him on a gurney, and Mrs. Conley just accompanied him, and they raced into the emergency room. They put him in trauma room 2. Then it was time to help the president. Trouble was, Mrs. Kennedy had a hold of him and she wouldn't let go. I pleaded with her. I said, please, Mrs. Kennedy, let us help the president. At first, I got no response at all. And I pleaded again, got no response. Now, I'd been with her a little over 3 years now at that time. So I knew her pretty well. And I thought, if I cover him up so that other people can't see him, will that affect the situation? And I immediately took off my suit coat and covered his head and upper back. As soon as I did that, she let go. We got him up, got him out of gurney. And then Mrs. Kennedy followed, and we went into the emergency room, and they put him in trauma room 1. There was a doctor there almost simultaneous. Name is Carrico, I think, and a nurse, one that had been out with the gurney at the car as well. And so, and it just built from there in the number of doctors that were coming into that room. But they were the head doctors, head surgeons, that, you know, the top of the group. They weren't brand new residents or anything. And so at one time I counted, I think 17, but I know for sure there were 12. And it was, but they never even removed him from the gurney, because I found out later from one of the nurses that the only time they remove people from a gurney going into the emergency room is when it's brought in by ambulance. And they want the ambulance company to have their vehicle or the conveyance back. So they have to take the patient off the gurney and put them on an examination table, and then they have the ambulance gurney go away. But in this case, he's already on a hospital gurney, and so they just didn't want to waste time taking him off that. They worked on him right there on that gurney. Never did turn him over to look at his back, but they
Yeah.
Yes.
You're right, Clint. You know, I interviewed half a dozen of those treating doctors in that room back in '92, and they said, "Oh, we thought he had a front throat wound. We thought that was the entrance wound for the bullet, and so we did a tracheotomy over it." And then I said, "Well, you know, how about the wound on his back?" And they said, "Oh, we never turned him over," and that was, you know, that was the case. Although you saw that wound, you were there, you were, you know, right on top of Mrs. Kennedy and the president. When the announcement is made at Parkland that he's officially dead, that's the announcement that I remember sort of is a punch in the stomach for the country. You know, it's Walter Cronkite on TV taking his glasses off and wiping his eyes a little bit, the anchor that never is emotional. It's everybody stopping. It's conductors at Philharmonics telling their audiences and the audience gasping. Was it still hearing it officially like an extra blow for you, or at that point were you just operating on adrenaline and what you had to do?
I was just operating on adrenaline, trying to get things done as I was supposed to. At that point, I was on the phone with the White House in Washington at the request of my supervisor to make sure that they were fully informed. And in so being, I had a call that was interrupted when the Attorney General asked to talk to me, Robert Kennedy, and wanted to know exactly what was happening and how bad it was. And I didn't want to tell him his brother was dead, so I just told him it's as bad as it can get.
Hey. Yeah, it's amazing to think that you're talking to the Attorney General of the United States, who happens to be his brother, and you're relaying the news. Were you aware at all, by the way, when you were at the hospital, that some of your colleagues who were in the Secret Service working for Lyndon Johnson, the vice president, were worried that there might be a wider plot, and we're already planning to get the vice president out of there as soon as possible?
Yeah, we became aware of that, and we all thought of that. I think everybody that was, you know, in the security business thought, is this some individual, or is this a broad some other country, or what is this? Who is causing this? That's why they did many of the things that they did. They closed the border to Mexico. They did a lot of things.
When you go to leave Dallas that day, tell me about that exit from Parkland and getting ready to return to Washington.
Well, the president, it was in trauma room 1, and the nurses cleaned him up as best they could. And they wrapped him in sheets. But first, they put a plastic mattress liner in the casket that I had ordered and had delivered from, I think it's on Neil's mortuary.
Mm-hmm.
And so because there was just blood all over his back, and they didn't want it to completely soil that interior of that casket. So they wrapped him in sheets, put him in the casket in trauma room 1. Then already the priests had been there and gave him the last rites. We prepared then to take him out to the motorcade, to the cars, and we left in the same vehicles that had brought the casket there. It was a mortuary, a hearse. One of our agents drove, Andrew Berger, and Mrs. Kennedy, when she came out, I said to her before we got into any vehicle, I said, Mrs. Kennedy, we can ride in this car right back here, right behind the hearse. She said, no. I'm going to ride in the back of the hearse with the president. And so she got in there and I got in right behind her. Also in there was Dr. George Berkeley, who was his doctor at the White House. He's a naval admiral. And the reason that he was there was there was a little confrontation just prior to our leaving the hospital when the coroner came in and said, what are you guys doing, seeing that we were preparing to leave with the body? He said, there's a law in Texas that states that you cannot remove a body from a medical facility in situations where there's been a homicide and there has not been an autopsy. There has to be an autopsy before that body can be removed. And Kenny O'Donnell was doing most of the talking with this gentleman, because Kenny was the chief of staff, and he asked him how long that would take, and the gentleman said, oh, maybe an hour, maybe a day. And Kenny said, well, that's not satisfying. We're going to have to go anyway. We're going to go to Washington. And so then the gentleman, the coroner, said, well, if that's the case, then you must have a medical system with the body all the way. And that's when Dr. Berkeley was selected to do that.
Clint, there are some accounts that say that that argument got a little heated.
Not nearly as what it's been built up to be.
Okay.
No guns drawn, no fisticuffs. There may be a little elevated in language in between those two gentlemen. Most of it was between Kenny O'Donnell and the coroner. Our people, Roy Kellerman was our supervisor on this trip. He didn't really get involved in that, except to move the body out.
There is in the public's view, when they look at the assassination and then Mrs. Kennedy's arrival back, and when the plane gets to Washington and she comes off the plane in a blood-splattered, still the same outfit she had on earlier, sort of a defiant strength in the First Lady that she's not going to change. She's been quoted as saying, "I want them to see what they did to Jack." Did you have that feeling in dealing with her on that was sort of part of her way of saying, I'm not going to change and present a clean front because I want them to see what happened?
That's exactly what it was. And she did exactly what she wanted to do. While we were on Air Force One at Love Field, before we took off and before Johnson was sworn in, Mrs. Johnson approached Mrs. Kennedy, asked her if she wouldn't like to change clothes because all of her clothes were so bloody. And she indicated no, she did not want to change clothes. And she wanted the people to see what had happened. And she was able to do that.
One of the things before we leave the assassination part, and I want to ask you about some things afterwards. One of your colleagues, a Secret Service agent, Paul Landis, has a book out recently, which he described finding a whole bullet on the rear of the car and leaving it on a stretcher at Dealey Plaza. He told you that, I guess, 8 or 9 years ago for the first time. But I gather that even if everything he said about that was true, it doesn't change anything in your account of what happened in the assassination.
Doesn't change a thing. The only thing it does, it probably it may eliminate the magic bullet theory, and that our inspector, he wanted, and what the Warren Commission said was the fact that it had gone through Kennedy into Connolly, zigzagged here and there on Connolly's body, and then ended up somewhere, and it was still pristine. Well, it really was not that. That's not what happened.
And that's probably the only area, I mean, it's a small area, but it's a big area that you and I have any disagreement ever on the case. I still could hold on to the single bullet. I think Paul Landis may have described how that single bullet ended up on a stretcher. But one thing that I never got a chance to tell you is in '93, in early '93, when we were getting ready to publish Case Closed late that summer before the 30th anniversary, we sent a copy of the manuscript explaining why we thought the new film, the Zapruder film, had shown the shooting sequence to Governor Connolly, and he had a copy of that manuscript in early May. In mid-May, he went into the hospital and then passed away the following month. His secretary called us to say he had it in his briefcase, Mr. Posner, but he never had a chance to look at it to say, I think you're absolutely wrong, or I happen to change my mind. So unfortunately, you agree with Governor Connolly on that. I do understand that. But Clint, tell me.
Why don't you I think maybe people would like to hear why Clint believes what he does and how the 3 shots, what he believes happened with those 3 shots.
If what Mr. Landis has said is true, and I'm not questioning whether he's a liar or anything like that, I'm just saying, if it is true that he found a bullet, picked it up, put it in his pocket. When we got into the emergency room, he laid it on a gurney in the hallway. Now, that's what he told me in 2014. That much I could accept.
Mm-hmm.
But his placing the bullet on the gurney in trauma room 1 at the foot of the president is, considering where it was found when it was found, I don't know how it would get from point A to point B. It couldn't. And the timing of the day is the same. It just couldn't be that way. So, and that was just that particular bullet, I think, because all that ammunition was old with that rifle, which meant that some of it apparently had deteriorated considerably. The gunpowder was not, it wasn't a full charge. I think perhaps if that is the case, the first shot and that's the one that hit the president, the one I heard and started to run, went in through the back and out through the throat and it was not very powerful and it didn't do a lot of damage and it got messed up in his clothing. And I think maybe if that's the case, that when he fell over toward Mrs. Kennedy and eventually ended up in her lap, And when we were trying to get him up and out and on to a gurney, that bullet somehow ended up where Mr. Landis says he found it, on the backseat of the car behind Mrs. Kennedy. That's a possibility, I guess. But the bullets or the shots that hit Governor Connolly, I think was shot number 2. Connolly thought it was shot number 2. Nellie Connolly thought it was shot number 2. And shot number 3, obviously, hit the president. And it hit him back here, exited here. And the reason it hit there was because his head was down and he was up against Mrs. Kennedy's face. He could not move forward. He had a brace on his back. It was impossible for him to move a full forward. And so gravity just took its position where it did.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and not to get into the shooting sequence with you, but the way that I see it from having ballistics people and film people come in now on what they can do with forensics and technology and ballistics they could never do before. I think that first shot that's fired by Oswald at a very sharp angle at around frames 161, 162 on the Zapruder frame does exactly what you say. People are turning around on that car to look back behind them to the right. And then that's the shot you think hit Kennedy, and I think that one missed. The second shot is only 3.5 seconds later. So that's the 3.5 seconds you have to run to the back of the car and get on there, essentially. And that third shot is 5 seconds after that. That's all. We're talking literally the clicks of the minute. If people look at their watch and realize how little time you had, it is even a more remarkable testament to your reaction and what you did, because we're talking 8.5 seconds from the moment the trigger is pulled on the first shot, no matter where it goes, to the headshot. And that's no time at all. You know, people are thinking of this as playing out over a longer period, but those of us who have studied at it, that's one of the reasons we sort of marvel at your reaction time on it. Clint, let me ask you, what did they do after the assassination, they meaning the Secret Service, federal government, to give you and other agents who had been there counseling, some help on post-traumatic stress syndrome or anything else? I didn't know until I read your new section in the book. They didn't do anything. It was sort of, suck it up and move on.
That's exactly what it was. We just continued on. I finally broke the end of 1963, December, last couple of days of December. And we were in Florida. Mrs. Kennedy was down there with the children, but it wasn't the same. And it was just terrible to see those 2 kids without a father now, and she was a widow. She was never smiling. It was just, it just broke me up and got me. And I finally ended up trying to kill myself by walking into the ocean. And lucky for me, there was a motorcycle police officer who was readily available. They got him there quickly, and he pulled me out of the ocean and it saved my life. But I was really a mess. And then I took about 10 days off, maybe only a week, right back to work. And from the 1964, we were on the go constantly. We were either skiing or at Antigua or down in southern United States riding horses, or out at Middleburg, Virginia, where she had just had a new house constructed, or we were always on the go. And then she was going to and from New York frequently because she wanted to move to New York finally. So there was never a dull moment.
Well, and there was nobody to replace. No. Clint and Paul Landis were the only 2 agents with Mrs. Kennedy. So all of those other agents were with Vice President Johnson or President Kennedy. And as soon as President Kennedy it was clear that he was dead, all of the agents that had been with Kennedy are now protecting Johnson. So there's still just 2 agents with Mrs. Kennedy. And so, you know, they're working 24 hours a day, basically. And then Mrs. Kennedy requested that Clint and Paul Landis were the ones to stay with her, and 3 agents with the children for that next year.
And you know, you've interviewed Lisa, a lot of the agents when you did the book on the Secret Service agents in Clint. You went through this. You weren't the only agent battling this idea of depression or thinking that you don't want to end it. There were a lot of people must have had that. No?
Oh, absolutely true. I mean, I think anybody that was there that day suffered from PTSD. I certainly did, and I really didn't. We didn't have any treatment for it, and it wasn't even known as PTSD in those days.
Mm-hmm.
It was called
like shell shock or something.
Yeah, but you work until you just were exhausted, pretty much, and
so you didn't have to think about it.
you know, you didn't have a life of your own. I had a wife and 2 kids, but they were in Virginia. I was never there.
You stayed in the service, which I also didn't. I knew by your resume that you were in for the next 12 years, but I forgot until you said it in the new update to the book that it was probably 12 of the most tumultuous years in American history. The assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, Vietnam War, the resignation of the president, Watergate. Boy, you picked a hell of a time to sort of stay in the protective service. I mean, what was that dozen years?
It was a new event almost every week. I mean, it was just crazy. You forgot the demonstrations in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. It just tore this country apart. I mean, there was never something that changed every week. It was crazy. I was always on the go with some new problem, and I stayed with the job. I had left Mrs. Kennedy in November of 1964. I had been with her alone because Landis, who you said was my assistant, he quit the service in June, I guess it was, in 64. So I was all alone with her until November, right after the presidential election. I was returned to the White House detail, President Johnson, and somebody else took my place with Mrs. Kennedy in New York. Then in 69, when Nixon and Agnew were sworn in, I had been the agent in charge of presidential protection from 67 to 69. But now, with Nixon coming in, they put me with the vice president. So I was there for 1 year. And then they sent me to the Federal Executive Institute in Charlottesville, Virginia. And from there, I went to headquarters. And in headquarters, I was promoted up and up and up until I became the assistant director. And that's from which I was retired in 1975. I didn't retire. They retired me.
You say in your, and this is part of what I call, you know, the personal part of Clint Hill, that you didn't pass, right. They said it was time to retire.
He didn't pass the physical.
I didn't pass the physical
examination
in January of 1975.
But that was all because of the effects of the post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
It was affecting him physically and emotionally as well.
Yeah, I have been getting sicker and sicker all the time. When I saw a whole bunch of doctors, nothing seemed to help, and so I was shell-shocked when they told me about it, that I was going to be retired, because I hadn't really anticipated that.
You were young. You were in your 40s.
43.
Yeah, 43. So very young. And something happened before you retired that I didn't know, that the Secret Service had started to use the Zapruder film in teaching agents about, what to do in certain situations. For you, that was a surreal experience. Here you are as a person who was there, and you tell me, if you can, tell the listeners what that was like when the Secret Service started to use the Zapruder film as a teaching aid.
Well, I was at headquarters at the time, so it was easy. They had me go to these training sessions for these agents. They were showing them the Zapruder film. They wanted to have them see how quick it happens and exactly what happens. And so I'd have to sit there while going through this, and then they'd re-rack it and run it back and back and back and forth and back and forth. And it really started to get to me that, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And it was really giving me problems.
I would think, and I'm not a doctor, but for somebody who has PTSD from that type of event, the assassination itself, then having to look at the film about it repeatedly in a work environment, this would add to the crisis, not be something that would get it better. When you did retire, you're very, very honest. What you have, talked about, what Lisa has written with you, from 76 to 82, this 6-year period of what I call battling your own demons, right? This very dark period. The people only know you as this heroic figure on the back of the car, and then they know your book published on the 50th anniversary. But this, to me, was one of those moments where we realize you're human. And tell us about that 6-year period.
Well, from 76, beginning in 76 until 1982, I lived in Alexandria, Virginia. Had a house there. In the basement of the house, I had an office and a little kind of a playroom. And I confined myself to that. But I couldn't sleep. And I was smoking very heavily, 2 packs a day. And that's why I have this lovely garment attached to my nose. And I started to drink in order to go to sleep. And I drank a lot. Smoked a lot, refused to see anybody. Agents would come by, wouldn't even acknowledge them. Sometimes they gave me a set of golf clubs when I was retired in 1975. They had a party for me, retirement party in Washington, and everybody came to the party. Agents, politicians, with Humphrey and Teddy Kennedy and Vice President Agnew, and his wife and Mrs. Eisenhower came down to attend at my retirement party. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, when I finally settled in at my home in Virginia, I couldn't sleep. I drank heavily. I smoked just terribly. And it took me 6 years, and then a friend of mine who was a doctor said, Clint, either you quit what you're doing or you're going to die soon. I thought, well, that's quite an option. So I quit what I was doing, cold turkey. No more cigarettes, no more whiskey, scotch it was. And I gradually got better, but it wasn't the same. I still was in bad shape, and I worked out a little bit. I didn't really recover. I finally went to a gathering of retired agents in 1990 in San Antonio, Texas. And I was amusing kind of at lunch. The waitress came around, ordered stuff from the table for all the people, and when they got to me, everybody had ordered their drinks and their food. When they got to me, you could have heard a pin drop around that table, because everybody was there listening to what I was going to drink. And when I ordered iced tea, it was like a fresh breath of air for everybody and myself included.
That's fantastic. Before we get to some listener questions that they've sent in, I have one last general question for you, and that is, in 2009, you sort of hit the lottery, but you don't know it at the time. You meet Lisa, who at that time is just a writer and journalist who's doing a book. Now, we know you very much as a pair, but not because she's just the writer of the books and the ghostwriter, but because she's your wife. So tell me how 2009 sort of changes your life for the two of you.
Well, I met her because she was writing, helping another agent to write a book called The Kennedy Detail. And the agent who she was working with wasn't in Dallas at the time of the assassination. He had been in Fort Worth. He was working a midnight shift, and he had gone on to Austin, getting ready to work the midnight shift in Austin. She needed to talk to somebody who had been in Dallas. The agent told her that, well, I was probably the guy she needed to talk to, but he didn't talk to anybody. He pleaded with him, and he started calling me, and eventually he wore me down, made all kinds of agreements that I could edit everything. And so she set up an appointment for me to discuss this with her in Washington, D.C. at the Hay Adams Hotel. She had come to Washington with her son for some reason. And so I met her, told her, I'll give you 2 hours. You had a conference room there in the hotel. Started out, she'd ask questions, I'd answer them. Pretty soon I said, 2 hours are up. And she said, okay. She said, as I'm leaving, she says, oh, Mr. Hill, she says, one thing, she said, there might be some follow-up. Did you give me your phone number? And like a fool, I did. I'm glad now, but at the time, it was foolish. And
I've told him you never, ever give a reporter your phone number.
I found that out because she started calling me. I mean, she was calling me from overseas. She was calling me from Qatar, from Doha.
That's where I was living at the time. But it worked out to be wonderful because he started talking about it, something he really had never done with anybody. He had testified before the Warren Commission, but other than that, he had never talked about this. And I could see what happened over the course of several months as we had these conversations just by phone. I could see a change in his personality from the man I had originally met. It was this weight being lifted off of his shoulder. And there was a sense of humor that started coming back, or into our conversations that I hadn't seen before. And then when he came to help us promote the book, and he would go out in front of audiences and tell the story. At first, it was really, really tough. And he would break down multiple times. And but he got through it. And the more he talked about it, the better he felt. And you can see now when he talks about it, it's almost like he's an observer.
Yeah, and you really do master, the two of you, Clint, in allowing your sort of innermost, personal issues to come forward in this new part of Update the Book. And Lisa, the way you present it it's really a telling. It tells the story of the history of what happened, but also tells the story of the man at the center of it. And I really appreciate that. Here, I'm going to just ask in this time left some questions that people in the audience have had.
Before that, I just want to say that Lisa really saved my life, pretty much. So I owe her everything.
Then we all thank you, Lisa. There you go.
I'm the lucky one.
So somebody wants to know here, Clint, how did the Secret Service communicate with each other back in 1963, or the 3 years we were there before, when there weren't, before earpieces?
We didn't have personal phones or anything. We hand signals. We had large two-way radios in cars, and on a golf course we would have a handy talkie but it was military excess stuff that we would get from the military to use. Very heavy.
Someone wants to know, you will have an opinion about this. Why do you think that Jackie Kennedy is so revered as an icon for women even today?
Well, just because of who she was. I mean, she set an example of how to be treat your children. She wanted to make sure they were disciplined, but she wanted to make sure that they grew up on their own, not as special children. She wanted to do whatever she could to improve things in the White House, for example. She thought it was a shame that the furniture and everything in there didn't just come from the United States. And she went about to change that. She did a lot of things, and I can understand why people would look to her as an example of who you might want to be, or who your children you would wish that they would be.
And she was so elegant and had such a sense of style. And she was young, you know, that's the other thing, coming off of the Eisenhowers, this family, and people just could relate to her. But like you say, even now, she's just an icon, and she's timeless.
Yeah, and her strength, she was so stoic with her children through that period. I think it helped keep the country a little bit together. Clint, someone wants to know if Lady Bird Johnson talked to Mrs. Kennedy on Air Force One when they were heading back to Washington.
Briefly, but only really to see if she wanted to change clothes or was willing to change clothes. That's about the only conversation they had. Mrs. Kennedy was sitting in the back of the plane next to the coffin with Kelly O'Donnell, Dave Powers, and Larry O'Brien, as a member of the president's staff.
Somebody wants to know if you remember when you heard that Oswald had been shot that Sunday, and what went through your head.
Well, I found out we were in the process of moving the president's body from the White House to the U.S. Capitol to place it in state. But I found out, and I was very upset about it. Why? Because we wanted to interrogate Oswald. We felt that we would be able to determine why he did what he did. Was there anybody else involved? All these other questions that we wanted answered. And he was the one that were going to give us those answers. But now we didn't have that opportunity.
Did the killing of Oswald for a moment, when Jack Ruby was the shooter, ever passed through your mind before you learned more about the case? Did you wonder for a second whether this was a silencing of an assassin? I mean, I remember as a kid thinking that before I investigated it, but did you?
Yeah, sure. I thought that was a possibility.
Yeah.
Because we did not have any idea who actually was involved in this situation.
One of the things, there's when you were out of the Secret Service, the assassination attempts took place on President Reagan, and two sort of, attempts at Jimmy Carter at one point, the gun jammed, and then another time they tried. What were you thinking when you were outside and now the president's back in the firing at the target, about those?
Well, the first one, when the attempts were made on Ford in California, I tried to get information, and I had only been out of the Secret Service a month, but I couldn't get any more information from anybody than you could. I mean, they wouldn't tell me anything. So I had to wait, just like everybody else, to find out exactly what had happened. What I thought was, I just hope this wouldn't become an annual event that every president is going to have to face this.
The two last questions. You mentioned a year after the assassination, when the Warren Commission came out with this report, 87% of people believed in a poll that it was a single assassin. And that number jumped to just above 5%, went down, kept declining after Oliver Stone's, film in 1990. You understand, you explained before why you think conspiracy theories are attractive to people and why they tend to believe them. But I suppose, are you of the belief that we will never have a uniform consensus on this? We'll never get everybody to agree it was a lone assassin, just as everybody's not going to agree it's a conspiracy. This will be debated long after you, I, and Lisa are gone.
I'm afraid that's exactly what the case is going to be. Unfortunately, I was hoping that people would realize what the truth is and that gather around that truth, but that is not to be, apparently.
I have to say that in all the talks and people that I speak to about the assassination, and I said this sort of at the beginning, but I mean it, Clint, you're the only one who people think of, whether they think it's a conspiracy with 100 people involved, or it's the government or the KGB or whatever else, or they think it's a lone assassin. Everybody speaks highly about you because they recognize what you did that day, and that you instinctively responded and did your best to try to stop the assassination. And so when I say that you're maybe the only hero that comes out of it, for you that doesn't mean anything because it didn't work to stop the assassination. But I do think that it's an unusual perspective. When I say that I'm talking to Clint Hill and to Lisa, I mean, people sort of, their eyes go up. You're a person, and it's not because you're a celebrity. It's not because you've gone out of your way to do that. There is respect for what you did and how you've approached the case. And I will say again, in this book, the real Clint Hill is there. Raw, great, suffering after the assassination, going through PTSD, but dealing with it, as you said. And it's a fantastic story, and I hope that a lot of people get it and read it.
Well, thank you, Ms. Plaza. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you for your book when you wrote Case Closed. I appreciate that. That was a great story, great book.
And thank you to everyone at the Sixth Floor Museum. We wish we could have been there in person doing this, but we're really grateful for the support over the years from everyone at the Sixth Floor Museum.
Yes, that's true.
I don't know, Clint and Lisa, as the last thing, how many people say to you when they go to Dealey Plaza for the first time and they leave and they say it's so much smaller than I thought. That's right. Nothing like visiting it to see it. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone on the sixth floor.
Hey, thank you for joining us. We hope you'll read the latest editions of our speakers' books, both of which contain some new insights and historical context, highlighting the deep impact the assassination of President Kennedy had on the nation, the eyewitnesses, and those who lived these moments. And, of course, still has on those who are seeking a better understanding of how it still matters today. Thank you all. We hope you'll visit the museum soon.